So one of the great things about, my particular style of GMing is I always like to find some obscure monsters that, some players might not be aware of, sometimes even grab, third-party material. But while I was at a convention once, I saw this monster and instantly fell in love, and I had to use it. I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. So what are we on to talk about today, Dave?
So today we're going to discuss D&D in a Castle highlights, basically the fun things and antics we got up to when we were at D&D in a Castle, share our experiences with you guys. And also, we're going to be there again, so it's kind of like the stuff that you can kind of look forward to.
Indeed. So D&D in a Castle is a great, premier vacation. You get 6 sessions of D&D spread out over 3 days. You get balls, you get banquets. It's a beautiful castle with loads of great gaming spots. You get a chance to even do one-shots with other guest GMs that are going to be there. So it's a great time. You should certainly check it out, and you should certainly come game with us.
All right, so what are some of the memorable moments from when you were at D&D in a Castle? You've been there twice now as one of their premier dungeon masters.
So one of the great things about, my particular style of GMing is I always like to find some obscure monsters that, some players might not be aware of, sometimes even grab, third-party material. But while I was at a convention once, I saw this monster and instantly fell in love, and I had to use it. Now, of course, it's D&D in a castle. What's D&D without, well, dragons? It's called Dungeons & Dragons for a reason, right? So I put in a dragon encounter. They fought this green dragon. It was, sitting on its hoard of treasure. And they think, okay, we slayed the dragon. It's time to celebrate. But as soon as the dragon fell and it crashed down on this hoard, the players began to hear this sucking sound. As if like air was being pulled into, into something else.
Like a vacuum cleaner?
Like
almost?
A vacuum cleaner. And everybody at the table just kind of like hushed. And they're like, allowing me to go through this description. And then I described this, 5 to 6 foot, 5 to 6 foot across orb that was kind of like orangey gold with 10 hands, 10 arms that just appears over top of the treasure pile and just begins stuffing the gold and items into its mouth. They were mortified. Now, this is a creature called a Withholder from Hit Point Press. I've actually got, one of their pictures hanging on my wall because I love this creature so much, and I had to use it. I had a friend who...
It is like the anti-murder hobo player character, right? This is the DM's, antithesis of that.
Indeed. And that's, it's entirely based on, the lore of what, Hit Point Press created, that they are treasure seekers, and they basically have this, extra-dimensional space inside their gullet, and they will show up where there's lots of treasure and try to, abscond with it.
So do they take the treasure, or do they actually consume it?
Kind of both. They're not eating it. It doesn't disappear, but it disappears into their extra-dimensional space. Now, I don't remember all of the stats off the top of my head because, as with just about every creature that I do, I like to modify and twist. So when this thing, because they, of course, had to, that's our treasure, and they immediately went right back into combat and fought and killed the thing, but it then exploded in a fireball, esque bludgeoning damage
so
of
shrapnel.
treasure.
Basically shrapnel, yeah.
But not of the actual creature, but of the treasure that it had consumed.
Yeah.
So this is a great way that you can be able to add additional items because maybe it's got something from another treasure hoard inside its gullet that, it hasn't relinquished. So it's a very cool, very fun creature to be able to play with. And you've got the ability to...
It had an interesting reaction every round that we used too, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it would try and actually take things from the other players as well. So there was a time where it literally ripped the sword out of the guy's hand and shoved it in its mouth. So that was fun to just be like, yep, I disarmed you and your item's gone. So that was in our first game of D&D in a Castle. I believe that was the end of session 3 that all of this happened. But in my most recent game at D&D in a Castle, I was playing my revised haunted house style game. They were in the House of the Forgotten Past and locked away in the basement of this haunted mansion, if you will, was a Morkoth, and it had, this is yet another creature that has the essence of dragons. It hoards treasure and that kind of stuff, and they're normally like aquatic, but I had this one just kind of like floating and flying in midair in this extra dimensional space of a mansion that we were playing in. And when I described the way this creature acted and talked and moved, the players, all but one of them, were terrified of this creature. It was definitely like low enough that they could have fought and overcome this thing, but they did whatever they could to just appease it and back away and continue on. Only one of the players was willing to actually give this thing a fight. And just the pure reactions of these players, was just a grand thing for me. And everybody told me, like, at the end that, that was a really cool encounter, that they were able to, like, essentially talk their way out of a fight, even though they didn't get any treasure out of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's always cool when the players do things you don't expect. And usually it's in the other direction, where it's like they try and murder something that shouldn't be murdered. They just want to kill everything. And this time you're like, for whatever reason, you put the fear of the Morkoth in them, and they just like, I'm out of here. GTFO.
In my most recent game, we actually had interactions essentially away from the table, where the player characters could visit essentially NPCs. There were a couple guest characters at the castle that they were able to interact with, and they were essentially in game, at the end of the day, bargaining with these NPCs to try and gather things. And they were allowed to ask for information or quest items or just straight up items in general. And because it's technically away from the table, the GMs aren't always present. These characters were like in between sessions talking to the GMs to say, like, all right, what is acceptable, trading material? And with these, so-called deal with the devil, we had players that were trading their memories. That was the theme of my particular game. It was the House of the Forgotten Past, where you could extract and lose memories, and that was my whole jam with that castle. So I actually had players, one player who was literally on a quest to try and find his mother, and in order to gather more information to get out of this quest, he actually traded away the memory of where he last saw his mother, like basically the goodbye moment. So like he traded this very touching, very, cool scene, just to be able to complete the adventure. And it was like, wow, that was so impactful and cool to me to see this kind of emotional thing and a loss, because with so many other memories that were out there, like, this is an important quest for your character, and without this piece of the information, you don't even know where to start your look again, because you no longer have this piece of where she last was.
Yeah, and that's something new from from the previous vacations in D&D in a castle, all this extra stuff that's happening outside of the game, and NPCs that can run into your game and appear, well, basically like guest actors would come in and RP a particular NPC.
Yeah, and that's actually, a lot of fun aspect of what D&D in a castle does. This one might not be, a highlight for players so much as for myself. I am
I disagree, only because at that point you are a player, so this is an experience that you had.
Right. Well, that's where I was getting at. So Jeremy, who's been a long time, Nerdarchy fan, was actually a player in both of my games in 2019 and 2022. Hoping to be able to game with him again in the future, and I will try very hard not to replicate this. But literally in 2019, very first session, very first encounter, very first initiative count, the players lost the initiative. We started with in media res, combat's happening. First action, he's playing a level 1 wizard. His character gets dropped. He's pretty much out of the combat, though his character did survive. Final battle. So, we wound up having, this kind of bookend scenario. Final battle, first encounter, first initiative. his character gets dropped. In both instances, his character survived. He did get healed and was able to take part in the final encounter. But we had this very comical bookend of one round, character getting dropped before they can do anything in 2 different combats in, 2 different D&D in a castles.
Nice.
The last thing that I really, want to touch on is, as we talked about, there is the ability to play one-shots with some of the other GMs that are out there. V Muse has a great YouTube channel. I've gamed with her, many times, both here on, the Nerdarchy channel as well as over on Mini Terrain Domain. She has a one-shot that she's run numerous times called BB's Place. And after having done a whole bunch of, GMing, I, of course, wanted to have a shot to play. So I gamed in one of her one-shots at the D&D in a Castle in 2019. So I played a goblin wizard who was an entertainer background. So I had the performance skill, and I was a divination wizard. I went in to have a good time, but I went with a typical goblin-style name, and his name was Vomit. And at one point in time, there wound up being a dance competition at the event, or at that session, and somebody threw out that the vomit was all over the dance floor. And just that phrase has, just led me to numerous smiles throughout the years, and everything about that session was just fantastic. All right, so those are my awesome memories from D&D in a Castle. What do you got, Dave?
All right, so my experiences were a little bit different. I did not make it to the castle this last time around, but I was there for the inaugural launching of D&D in a Castle when they had it in France. I was there as a guest player, and then I was at Lumley Castle with you when we ran our campaigns, and then I was at Langley Castle as a one-shot GM. So I had a little bit of different experiences. And as a player, one of the things I noted both as a player and then again when we ran it is you end up playing with a lot of GMs. And the thing that I've realized over the years, dungeon masters make the best or worst players, right? For the most part. Either they're the dungeon master because they love to be in control and need to be in control all the time, or they get stuck being the dungeon master and they just like creating and stuff like that. So the latter tend to make really good players. The former, not so much. And I've even met plenty of GMs that'll be they're just straight up. It's like, I am a terrible player. I like being in GM seat because I want to control everything. Right. Which is fine. But the experience that I've had at D&D in a Castle is a bunch of GMs finally getting to play and cut loose and loving the experience, right? And the thing that makes dungeon masters great players is they understand what it is to be a dungeon master, and they're there to have a good time. And I find more often than not, they want to facilitate everyone having a good time and help facilitate the GM actually GM in the game. So GM Tim was my dungeon master at the first one, and I played a halfling battle master with a I don't know if I used a crossbow or a bow. But I think I used a short bow, and the first experience that like kind of kicked things off was we were in this dungeon and there were all kinds of dead running around. In the center of this dungeon, there's this walkway over nothing from two different sides with a platform. It's almost like a whole Death Star type scene, right? With a beam of light streaming down. And one of the players is like, I want to put my hand in it. So he puts his hand in it up to like the elbow, and all the flesh is completely melted away, and he's left with a skeletal hand. Oh, wow. And like, okay, so this is weird and kind of cool. So now he's got a skeleton hand, and I think he's our cleric, right? We end up having to flee this dungeon from a horde of undead. Oh. Well, there's a barrier, leaving the dungeon that the undead can't pass through. So it's perfect. We all just run out, except the cleric, who can't because he's stuck by his arm, and the undead are coming. So we end up chopping off his arm so that he can escape. And he goes through the rest of the whole entire campaign missing that part of his arm. Oh my God. Yeah, like he just straps a shield to what's left of the stump and carries on. Oh. And it was such a memorable and cool and badass moment. And like, because like they're like, what are we gonna do? We're gonna have to cut it off, and the cleric's like, do it. So it's like they were there for it. So that part was like super cool. Another moment from that game was our table and another table. So GM Tim and James Intercasso decided they're going to do a contest of champions and bring the two tables together.
Oh wow!
And it's a battle style arena, us against them. There's this like imp character that's like an MC and is announcing everything. And like it's funny because GM Tim turns to the group and goes, "I'm so sorry," because like my character was so specced out. And I was like, oh yeah, and like Ted knows me. I love any chance I get to do PvP, but not in a dickish way. And like if he mind controls me, he can always count on me to go balls to the wall to try and take the party out.
It's true.
And hey, look, plausible deniability is not my fault. The DM did it. But in this case, like it was a contest of champions, so I wanted our side to win, obviously. And so, like, the first thing I do is, like, the barbarian characters, I just start hitting them with arrow after arrow, and then I action surge and do it again to using pushback. And we're already pretty far apart, so they're, like, just pushing them back so far, and then at one point, our wizard puts the barbarians in a globe of force, a wall of force, so that they can't, so they have to stop raging, and also they're knocked out of the battle. But with two things would happen every round. The arena would shrink because it started off enormous. It would shrink and push us all together. And after every full round, a beholder disco ball would drop down, and then spin around and hit everyone with anti-magic field. Turning off any of the ongoing magic. So, so if there was any magic that kind of dicked over any players and kind of took them out of the scene, it would be shut off, and then they were back in it. So that was kind of cool.
But it would also turn off anything that you're concentrating on or what have you. So that would greatly affect those ongoing spells that can greatly change a battle.
Yes. Exactly. Right. So it was this wild card thing that would happen every round. I think our side did end up winning. And we even ended up taking away their Sword of Tiamat that they needed to complete their quest. They got it back. But I thought it was kind of funny that if we were to take it. So that was a big part of, my experience at D&D Castle the first time as a player, which was a lot of fun. There was probably tons of other memorable moments too, but we're going back a few years, and those things were kind of sticking out. I believe one of the players disappeared, and we found a statue of them, and we had a flying ship, and we turned it into the figurehead of our flying ship. And I know at some point we commissioned an artist to do a portrait of our group in game.
That's awesome.
It was very important to one of the players, and we made that happen. So those were some of the things that happened during the game. Oh, and I think my halfling converted over to the dwarven cleric's god, which was a dwarf god, of course.
Of course.
And I think I ended up with an awesome dwarven beard on my halfling, as one of the the prologue to the campaign.
Nice.
Because we were visited by this god and
epilogue, you mean?
Yeah, epilogue. That's it. So that was a great experience. Now, as a dungeon master, there was a couple things that happened. The thing that stands out the most was we had given out these super inspiration to our players. It was an ace of spades, so each of my players got an ace of spades handed to them again. You get to use this once, and it's inspiration, only way better, and you're gonna be able to negotiate with me what this actually does. And I had this this room that was all crystalline walls, and they could see something almost like an aquarium with something swimming off in the distance, and they could feel something connecting with their minds and was talking to them. But there was also these arches of crystal skulls, and the one character, his whole thing was, he was actually another halfling slinger battle master, but his whole thing was he was a gem cutter and jeweler, and he was fascinated by gems. So he's I need to take one of these skulls, and he makes a really good check, and he manages to extract one. And then like, he's like, I want another one. And he fails his check, and I'm like, you just can't get it. He's like, I want to turn in my card. And he turns in his card. So I'm like, all right, grab your character sheet and a D20. And so he begins doing it. And I absolutely let him do everything he wanted. But there was an unexpected consequence was, there was a malevolent presence that was trapped in the room that worked directly with our big bad for this campaign. And loosely, all of our campaigns were connected. We had the same big bad. And because he kept tampering with this room, which was like this arcane psychic device, by continuing to push his luck, he made connection, or the being that was swimming around made connection with him, which was like an aboleth.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, all right, you need to make a wisdom saving throw. He fails horribly. He becomes a thrall to the aboleth. And he's like, look, you're going to act normally and do everything you normally do until I tell you otherwise. Now, we had our big bad battle coming up, and I was a little concerned because I seen some of the stuff my wizard did. And I was like, oh, man, if he mazes the big bad, it could be all over in one round. Well, so I'm like, all right, I put that in my pocket. And then, unbeknownst to me, there's a one-shot where the wizard player and the halfling player, they kind of get into it a little bit, and the wizard player was kind of being a dick to the other player, right, with what their character was doing, and he's like, oh man, I'm gonna get you for this somehow, some way, and I didn't know anything about this. So we get to the conclusion where we bring all three tables together, and they're fighting this undead outer brain surrounded by shield guardians.
So that's 17 players and 3 GMs running a singular combat. It's something that was absolutely a spectacular thing. I let Dave put it on his because of this, but I absolutely adored this. Each of us, Dave, Doug, and myself, ran a different aspect of what was happening during the combat, and everybody had their turn. It was absolutely fabulous. But go on.
Yeah, so during the middle of this combat, the aboleth contacts the halfling and goes, now's the time, kill the wizard. And the player already kind of has animosity against the other player, and he unleashes everything he's got, all of his battle master maneuver dice. He's using what I call a ghost sling. Because when you use it, like there's a ghost image trailing of it. So, but when you fling the stone, a second ghost stone, goes with it and does die 10 points of force damage. So it's 2 to 14 points of damage.
Right.
It's not crazy, but it's way better than what a sling normally does.
Right.
And he just unloads on the wizard and then goes, I action surge. And then does it again. I'm like, well, you dropped the wizard. You still have several attacks left. What do you want to do? Because also part of it was kill the wizard. You're now an ally of
The bad guys.
The bad guys. So, yeah. So he goes after one of the other players as well and begins fighting, And then during that battle, another one of the players turns in their ace of spades to break the enchantment and bring that character back onto their side. So that was a lot of fun. Also in that moment, in that game, it wasn't from your table, it wasn't from my table, but at this point, they're all our tables.
Right.
Another one of the players stands up and is like, I'm doing this, I'm casting this spell, this is what it does, blah, 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 blah. And this is like a 18th level bard, from a player that came because they were the mother of another player, never played Dungeons and Dragons in her life. And like, oh my God, to see this woman just spout out all this D&D information and never played before. This is like her sixth session, at this point, and have and she's have picked up and gained so much mastery of a complex character at a high level so fast. That was amazing.
It was truly epic, and we did rapid leveling. And, we really weren't expecting, when we planned all of this at a time, to have somebody to come to D&D in a castle that had never played before. We started off at level 1, and every session they were gaining 2 levels. So we were rapid fire leveling so that, by the time we ended, they were, tier 4 characters. There might have even been more leveling in that to get to the 18th level, but it was potent, and to have somebody to do this kind of stuff, it was really blown away. And I didn't know until after it was all over that this person had never played before, because she had a true understanding of her character, and that was just fabulous.
Right. It also wasn't at either of our tables, so we didn't experience that player. But yeah, so like the culmination from from that player doing the one thing and dropping their card up until that final fight was so cool. And then, and there was another thing. One of the characters, they were on a quest looking for their lost daughter. Now, all the characters have been plucked from different places and dropped into this location, this castle. And so this particular castle, there was a ghost story about an affair and a lover and some murder, right? So I inserted his daughter into that, and had it happen, the same thing happened to her, but hundreds of years before. When you get to like planar travel, things can get timey-wimey from time to time, right? So they actually were able to realize that the daughter was involved. She had gotten murdered, and they were able to put that particular spirit to rest. And they were kind of got reunited. It was kind of sad, but also like she had a good life up until the point where she was murdered. And then also the ghost was able to bless them. That's how the ghost sling came about, and they all got special items from that. Stuff that they had were kind of enchanted and made into magic items. So that was like a cool interpersonal moment where there was some role playing, there was mystery solving, and tying into a backstory. And then there was the most damaging encounter of my whole session. I had basically a tunnel that corkscrewed downward at a slight slope. It wasn't a trap. It was just a minor inconvenience that I was like, put them as an obstacle. I put it in front of the players to see how they overcame it. And what do? The one player is like, I'm going to surf down on my shield like Legolas. And all of them are like, that's the only way to get down, I'm pretty sure. And so, like, impromptu skill challenge, where most of them end up taking more damage than I've done in any of the encounters, just because they ride this runaway shield down this spiraling smooth slope, because they have to make athletics checks and acrobatics checks and vehicles land check for a shield, I guess. And they crash into this monument at the bottom. So like that sequence actually took a while, and there was a lot of skill checks involved. And it was actually a lot of fun. And then, they had to go into a battle right from there, already injured, after like basically kicking the crap out of themselves. And those are like the 3-4 most memorable moments for me from that particular experience. But as a one-shot GM, I had a lot of fun. And I ran the Planner Zoo adventure, which is over on the Nerdarchy store, and I ran it for 2 different groups. And it was fun to see how they dealt with it. And I decided to add a little bit more to it. They each had to travel to the location, which isn't actually in the adventure, but I added that. And I wanted to use a 2-headed tentacled T-Rex, because I think Ted has a mini or something. They put so many resources into this. I was just like, I'm gonna let it go. I'm gonna let them go with it, and it's fine. They're gonna defeat this T-Rex by making it their friend. So they basically ride it to the location they're going to go to. But it's a dungeon. It's small. They can't bring it in. I knew this going in and into it. So I'm like, you know what? No harm, no foul. They had fun with it. They've got a pet. They've got this pet dinosaur. If they ever come back out, it was going to be there waiting for them. And just like the ingenuity of players and seeing them get together, that was a blast for me. So that was one of my experiences as a one-shot GM, and it was a ton of fun. But another one was, it just so happened that one particular evening, everyone decided, like a bunch of players decided they were going to play their own games and do their own thing. Like one of the players, she wanted to run her Baby Muppets D&D game, and people were all about it, so they were doing that, and other things were going on. And so I'm like, all right, I guess I don't have anything to do right now. I'll go to the bar. So I'm on my way to the bar. There's Stefan Pogorny, and he's got this huge castle set up with Dwarven Forge, of course, obviously. And they're like, hey, we need more players. You want to play? I'm like, sure. I was just going to get a drink. So I was on my way wandering to the tavern to get a drink. I ended up in a 1E D&D game with Stefan Pogorny from Dwarven Forge. And one, it was just a lot of fun. I hadn't played 1E in, probably like 30 years. And two, the way the game ended was awesome because someone had either an item or a spell, a lightning bolt. And none of these players had played 1E before. And they cast the lightning bolt, and it goes through a bunch of the enemies, hits a wall, comes back, and then goes through the enemies again, and then
It's the caster.
then goes through a couple of the players and the caster, killing all the enemies, and I believe maybe one of the players as well. And I was like, oh, that was so good. And like when he said he was casting it, and it's just like my mind flooded back to the early days of playing. Like we like two-pronged this, and I was on the other prong, so I was fine.
Sweet.
So I got to just sit back and enjoy it because I knew it was coming. Like we literally had games where wizards are trying to do trigonometry to figure out the perfect way to shoot their lightning bolt so they can hit as many people as many times as possible with the same bolt of lightning.
I mean, we've played games where we pulled out, the measuring tape and be like, all right, well, this is how much of a lightning, this is the duration in feet. So it's going to go this way, hit that thing, bounce back, and stop just before it gets to the caster. Excellent. It's utterly stupid and ridiculous, but I mean, that's the rules.
That's the rules. And it's kind of fun when it was going on too. So those are my experiences, but also you left something out. I heard people got to play a brand new game that hasn't even been commercially launched yet.
So when I was at D&D in a Castle last time, not only did I run my 6 sessions campaign, I also ran 2 one-shots of Zoo Mafia, and all the players that had a chance to play along with me absolutely adored and loved it. We got some cool quotes. I actually, we had made some custom dice to hand out to some of our playtesters. So they walked away with not only getting to try our game that we're in process of making, but had some cool swag to go along with it as well.
Yep. ZooMafiaRPG.com to sign up for a free copy of the Quick Start rules if you haven't already.
So those are just some of our awesome memories that we've had from D&D in a Castle. There's loads more, but this video has gone on long enough. If you'd like to join Dave and myself for July 2023 for D&D in a Castle, jump down into the description below and check that link and sign up.
Let us know your awesome experiences playing D&D and some of the cool places that you played it before. Maybe you've been to D&D in a Castle and you'd like to weigh in with your own story. Do so down in the comments below.
While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, click on that notification bell. You know the drill.
Quick reminder, we drop new videos on the channel several times a week, so come on back. But you can't wait till then? No worry, we got you covered. Check out Running D&D in a Castle.
So until next time, stay nerdy.